The Firm, India's only show on corporate law, tax and audit matters.
Hello and welcome to The Firm. On the show this week, tax trauma is back. A senior official of the travel website MakeMyTrip.com was arrested for allegedly not paying service tax. This is the 29th such arrest, say lawyers. And Wall Street investment banker Ken Moelis says deflation is driving record M&A activity. Earlier this month, a senior official of travel website MakeMyTrip.com was arrested for the alleged non-payment of service tax dues, some 67 crore rupees. Now, he was released on bail, but only after promising to pay up some of that amount. Lawyers tell me this is the 29th such arrest. Is this due process or is this extortion? Joining me to answer that question is Rohan Shah of ELP. Rohan, thanks very much for joining us on the show. I just want to lay out some of the basic facts of the case as are available. The Revenue Department made some claims saying Make My Trip has not paid service tax dues of about 67.4 crores. I'm told the company pays service tax on all the service fees that it charges. These dues pertain to unpaid service tax by hotels, booking for which was done using the MakeMyTrip.com portal. MakeMyTrip.com officials were summoned to account for these unpaid dues, but no show cause notice was issued by the department. Despite that, a senior official of MakeMyTrip was arrested and released only after agreeing to pay some of the disputed amount. I'm told he paid about 25 crore rupees or promised to pay that as part of the bail terms. Is this a common occurrence, a senior official or executive of a company being arrested for non-payment of service tax dues?
Menka, as you mentioned, for service tax itself, since they brought in this set of provisions for arrest, which was the May of 2013, they've had 29 arrests, which is almost one a month. And that's the sort of recurrence that we're looking at here. So yes, unfortunately, it is commonplace. And without wanting to go into the facts, three things which are important for me in the context of this case. First, you're not supposed to trigger this proceeding unless you have reason to believe and unless you follow due process. That's what the Supreme Court has repeatedly said, as recently in Tata Chemicals. So the situation here is when you don't issue a show cause notice, certainly it's not due process. The second situation is that apparently this was a controversy across the whole industry. So it isn't that it is bad intent by one entity who is consciously not paying tax. It was an issue of interpretation, and it was an issue of interpretation across the industry. This third issue, and that's the one which is worrying, is that in every one of these cases, ultimately the resolution, whether it is through the court or whether it's through a process of interaction with the department, ultimately leads to a payment of some amount of tax even prior to the issuance of a show cause notice.
Yeah.
So, it is extortionist. And the threshold in terms of their following the rules is getting lower and lower. And the one area which I think is important to clarify is this. You have two types of situations in which there can be an arrest. One, where you have a show cause, there is an offense which is proven, and in addition to the civil proceeding for recovery of tax, you have a criminal process.
Right.
And you go through a whole criminal trial after framing of charges, and then there's sentencing. Then there is a distinct situation where in the stage of investigation, they want to arrest you for what they would call a custodial investigation. Now, that is the power that they're actually using. And when you use this power, essentially what you're saying is that on the basis of a suspicion, you are going to arrest the person on the label that you think he will interfere with the course of investigation. You take him away for a period of time, knowing very, very well that two things will happen. A, there will be panic across the board in industry, so everyone will comply. And this particular company, to stop this whole process, will in any case disgorge a large amount of money.
Yeah.
So this whole process of arresting people in the stage of investigation, A, is unusual, but unfortunately is so recurrent that that is now really top of everybody's mind when you talk of service tax or India.
It's a telling statistic when you say that it's almost one arrest every month ever since these changes to the Finance Act were introduced. I'll go back to the original changes and what prompted them. But before that, I'm a little stuck with this non-issuance of a show cause notice and yet being able to arrest. And the reason why I stress on it, I get custodial, arrests in that sense, or custodial investigations as you call it. But in tax, when so much of this is an interpretation issue, right? When you're not fully sure that this is a crime that's been committed, you actually have not paid dues that you were supposed to pay. This is an interpretation matter, especially in the case of how portals have been treated, which you laid out. Is it fair to be able to exercise this custodial investigation power where you are arresting a senior executive of a company simply because you believe the company ought to have paid more tax? You haven't yet sent them a show cause notice. You said so in the Delhi High Court. That's where the DG of Central Excise says that we've not issued a show cause notice because the matter is still under investigation, which means that you haven't yet concluded whether the company did anything wrong or not. And yet you've gone ahead and arrested an official.
Yeah. So, this sort of a situation of custodial investigation, and it's something, for example, that you hear of, in gross crimes. But
in
to
murders,
apply,
etc., I would think, right?
So murders and the like, and you're seeing it in some criminal trials just
Correct.
now. But to apply it to tax is very, very unusual globally, because ultimately, and most jurisprudence take a view, that tax is ultimately about a civil liability. You cannot impinge on life and liberty, so there is no exception in many countries where you can do this sort of thing, where ultimately it is about money. Ought you to have paid tax, more, less, etc. So the situation is very, very unusual. The thresholds are very, very high. And what would be the threshold? If you have concrete evidence that somebody is effectively evaded, and that somebody is in the process of destroying evidence related to that, then it's that sort of an exceptional circumstance in which you would be able to invoke this power. Whereas what we're doing it is, because we have the power, we now invoke it with very, very low thresholds. Because the reason to believe test, as per the Supreme Court, is that you must be absolutely convinced that there is an evasion and somebody is then trying to effectively corrupt the course of evidence.
Right.
But we use it whenever we have a sense that there is a tax evasion. And the worst part is, before this new provision came in the May of 2013, they used to arrest people till the Supreme Court judgment in Om Prakash, and then, to get over that, they brought this. But in that phase, we took several of those clients to a full-fledged appeal. And of all the cases we were handling, each one of them succeeded in the tribunal.
So they won.
On merits.
And
they
the
won.
Revenue Department lost.
They won hands down, and in a few of those cases, when they went to Supreme Court in appeal, those appeals were dismissed with observations against the tax department.
I want to go back to the actual genesis of this issue. You've pointed out several times that it actually belongs to the Finance Act of 2013. Two new sections were introduced then, Section 90 and 91. Offences under Section 89, specific subsections were made cognizable then, and the power of arrest was introduced in cases involving the evasion of service tax of up to 50 lakhs or more. Last year, I'm told, after the industry was sort of represented several times with the Finance Ministry, they increased that threshold to 1 crore. I don't know if that's become effective or not. But why was this introduced to begin with in the Finance Act 2013? Was it simply to overcome a Supreme Court decision?
Yes, and effectively the Finance Act went so far as to say that. So the situation you had is, in the period pre-2013, there was a power of arrest. Two of the controversies was, did you need to have a warrant or, on the cognizable, non-cognizable? And once arrested, was the offense bailable or not bailable?
Right.
All of that, in a way, culminated in judgment of the Supreme Court in Om Prakash's case, where they said, given that it's only a civil issue, A, you have to issue a warrant, B, it is always bailable.
Okay.
To get around that, we got the new set of provisions, and they made a demarcation between situations where you must issue a warrant, situations which were bailable, situations which were not bailable. And for example, if you recovered taxes but did not pay them over to the government, then effectively from their perspective they didn't need to issue you a warrant, and effectively when they took you in, they'd have to produce you before a magistrate for you to get bail.
Okay.
So they also demarcated what they thought were more enhanced offences and less enhanced offences. But all of this, in a way, was a response to that Supreme Court judgment.
So basically it was to override what the Supreme Court said.
That's right. And then you have a situation where, you talked about the 50 lakhs, 1 crore.
Yeah.
The provision still says 50 lakhs.
So it hasn't been changed to 1 crore, even though the circular
The
says
statute doesn't say that. So what you now have is an administrative guidance saying 1 crore. But, look at 1 crore in the context of the businesses that you have today.
Yeah.
And, that could really be 1 month's interpretational issue.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, 1 crore is also very low. And the world over, the protection is not from the amount, although our amount is very low. The protection is from the conduct. So, you say that a commissioner can look at it, then you maybe give him a committee of commissioners. But the threshold is not just reason to believe. The threshold is your complete conviction based on evidence that something has gone wrong. Reason to believe, Supreme Court has said even in Tata Chemicals, is you have to pitch it so high that in no conceivable situation you could form a different view.
Yeah.
Because this ultimately involves life and liberty. So the threshold is very, very high. Now legally the threshold is very, very high. Practically the people look at either the monetary or a very, very low threshold, and by the time this can be corrected, somebody has been arrested, somebody has already paid the tax. Then Supreme Court in its wisdom states this ought not to have been done. But you can't wait that long, because the damage has already been done. Okay. Not only to the industry, but also to us as a country, because this is the sort of thing which unfortunately grabs headlines.
Okay, the final question then, and I think you've already in part answered my question, but is this due process or is this extortion?
I don't think you will find any fair-minded tax administrator or judge able to say that this is due process.
So this is extortion, you're saying?
This is certainly bordering on extortion, and the fact that it occurs so often, and oftentimes you see that an MNC is targeted or a sunrise industry is targeted. In a way, it seems to be only a means to get a message out, comply or face the most dire consequences. And I think extortion, one part of it. But if you are saying the culture is one a month to ensure you will stay in line, and if somebody has to go to jail for that, that's fine. I think that's a larger issue than even just the extortion.
Rohan, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you don't get a call from the Finance Ministry for speaking your mind. And with that, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Wall Street investment banker Ken Moelis says deflation is driving record M&A activity.